So today we're diving deep, into ancient empires, but not just any ancient empires. We're going specifically for Asian empires, and we're going to be going like beyond the surface level stuff that everyone kind of knows. Like we're not going to spend a lot of time on like the rise and fall dates. I
Mhm.
think everyone kind of have a general grasp on that. We're going to be looking more at like what made these empires tick and how they still influence us today.
That's what's really fascinating to me. It's not just ancient history. It's the DNA of so many things we take for granted. Trade routes, religions, even political ideas. Like it all goes back to these empires in a way.
Yeah, and for this deep dive, we're going to be taking a look at ancient Asian empires, a concise overview.
Great book. It really captures the scope.
It does, yeah. So let's just dive right in. I think chronologically, the first one we should look at is the Akkadian Empire.
Right around 2334 to 2154 BCE.
Now, this was the first empire, like, ever in all of history.
Yeah.
That's pretty mind-blowing in itself.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, think about it. One leader, Sargon of Akkad, managed to unite all these Mesopotamian city-states.
Like, how did he pull that off back then? I mean, was he just a military genius?
He was definitely a skilled military leader, no question. But it was more than just brute force. He also formed strategic alliances, and he had this vision,
Yeah.
a vision of centralized power. Nobody had really done that before on that scale. It was revolutionary.
So he basically wrote the playbook for empire building.
You could say that, yeah. Standing army, standardized systems of governance, the works. But, and this is interesting, the Akkadian Empire didn't actually last that long, relatively speaking.
Why is that? Like, what makes some empires endure for centuries and others just, fizzle out?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something we should keep in mind as we go through these other empires. What are the common threads? What are the fatal flaws?
All right, so moving on, let's talk about the Assyrians. They were around, what, from roughly 2500 to 609 BCE, give or take.
Somewhere in that ballpark, yeah.
Okay, so everyone knows the Assyrians for their military. They were like total badasses,
Yeah.
right? Super intimidating, ruthless warriors. But here's the thing. They were also, get this, huge bookworms.
Yeah, huge contrast, right? But it's true. I mean, their library, the Library of Ashurbanipal, legendary. It had thousands of clay tablets on every subject imaginable: history, literature, law, even astronomy.
So they weren't just conquering people, they were conquering knowledge, too.
It really makes you think about how history gets written, doesn't it? I mean, we have this image of them as these brutal warlords, which they certainly were to a degree, but they also clearly valued knowledge and learning. It's a good reminder that things are rarely black and white.
Yeah. Okay, so let's jump ahead a few centuries to the Persian Empire, or to be more precise, the Achaemenid Empire. This is around 550 to 330 BCE, and this is a big one, like really big.
Huge. They ruled over a territory that stretched from Egypt all the way to India. Think of the Roman Empire, but in Asia.
Yeah, and this is like way before planes, trains, and automobiles.
Mm.
So how did they manage such a vast empire? Like, how did they keep it all together?
Infrastructure, my friend. Infrastructure.
Yeah.
They built an incredible network of roads. I know roads sound boring, but think about it. It allowed them to communicate across this massive area. They could move troops quickly, trade goods, maintain control.
Like their version of the internet, almost.
Exactly. It connected this vast network of people and cultures. It facilitated trade, communication, everything, and it really helped them to maintain their power for as long as they did.
Right. Okay, so now let's move over to India, where we have the Maurya Empire. This was roughly 321 to 185 BCE. And I think what's really fascinating about the Mauryans is Emperor Ashoka.
Ah, Ashoka.
Right. Because he converted to Buddhism, and that really changed how he ruled.
Yeah, his transformation was pretty amazing. He went from being this conqueror, very focused on expansion, to really embracing the principles of Buddhism, nonviolence, compassion, social justice, all of that.
And that actually influenced his policies, like for real.
Yeah, absolutely. He renounced conquest, promoted religious tolerance, and really focused on the welfare of his people, building hospitals, digging wells, things like that. It's a great example of how a leader's personal beliefs can actually impact the trajectory of an entire empire.
Yeah, it's not just about armies and territory. It's about ideas, too. Okay, so shifting gears again, let's head over to China, home of the Han Dynasty. This was 206 BCE to 220 CE. And of course, this is when the Silk Road was really flourishing.
And it's important to remember that the Han Dynasty didn't just benefit from the Silk Road, they actually helped to create it. They invested heavily in infrastructure, secured trade routes, standardized weights and measures, and even fostered diplomatic ties with neighboring regions.
So they were kind of like the architects of this global trade network.
In a way, yeah, they understood the importance of trade and cultural exchange, and they took active steps to promote it. And the Silk Road, of course, had a huge impact on the world. It wasn't just about silk. It was about ideas, technology, religion, all kinds of things flowing between East and West.
And then, of course, we have to talk about the Mongols. I mean, you can't talk about ancient Asian empires without mentioning Genghis Khan.
Oh, absolutely. Between 1206 and 1368 CE, the Mongols created the largest contiguous land empire in history. And they did it all starting from essentially nothing.
I mean, how? They were nomadic people, right?
Yeah.
How did they conquer all these sophisticated societies?
Their military tactics were just incredibly effective. They were masters of horsemanship and archery, and they used psychological warfare to great effect. But they were also really good at incorporating conquered people into their ranks. They weren't afraid to learn from others, and that made them incredibly adaptable. And they were geniuses when it came to logistics. Think about it. They were sustaining these massive campaigns across incredibly vast distances. They had to be organized.
So they're like military geniuses on horseback.
Pretty much, yeah. And the crazy thing is, the Mongol Empire itself wasn't that long-lasting, but the impact was huge. They really reshaped the political and cultural landscape of Eurasia.
You know, I keep thinking back to the Assyrians and their library. I mean, on one hand, you have these fierce warriors, but on the other hand, they had this deep respect for knowledge. It really just goes to show how much more there is to these empires than meets the eye, you know?
Exactly. They were complex. And it's too easy to just reduce them to simple stereotypes. I mean, if you could travel back in time, just for a day to see one of these empires in action, which one would you choose? I mean, would it be the bustling markets along the Silk Road? The grandeur of the Persian court? Or maybe the nomadic life of the Mongols?
That's such a great question to think about. There's so much we can still learn from these ancient civilizations.
Definitely.
All right, well, that wraps up our deep dive on ancient Asian empires.
Thanks for having me. I always love talking about this stuff.
Me too.